It's time again for a new episode of Book Club, and today I am joined by some wonderful creators to discuss everything TTRPG player characters. The creation, the development, the retirement, and maybe even death, and maybe some tips for when you're creating your TTRPG player character. This episode is called My Name Is. Kind of like the song, you know. And just a heads up for our listeners, there might be some spoilers in this episode because we will be talking about characters from the campaigns of Shrimp and Crits, Monster Hour, and the Monsters Playbook. And without further ado and that teasing, I'm very excited to introduce all of my guests. You are very familiar with our cult-denying player, Lauren, from the Monsters Playbook.
Hi.
The shrimpiest of shrimps, Cap from Shrimp and Crits.
Hello.
New to visiting our pod is Tio from Monster Hour.
Hello, hello.
If you guys wouldn't mind reminding our listeners what your pronouns are, what 3 of your favorite characters are that you've played, and just where we can find and follow your podcasts. I think we should start with Tio since you're new.
Oh, gosh. Okay. All right. My pronouns are she, her, and, oh boy, 3 favorite characters I've played. I only think publicly I've played 2, Constance and, oh God, who am I? Claire Claremont. But in a private little pre-Monster Hour thing, I played an emotionally, psychologically damaging dwarf named Tippletoe in a D&D campaign. And all I did was emotionally upset people on the battlefield with visual stuff. Anyway, don't worry about it. That's a thing for another time. And
love it.
Yeah, it was. You can ask Quinn, also of Monster Hour, how he felt about that. He was in that campaign. And speaking of Monster Hour, that's the podcast I'm on, Monster Hour, which I'm pretty sure all of our handles are at Monster Hour Pod across the Instagram, Twitter universe. We're also on the Discord, and I should have asked what else I'm supposed to plug, but yay, that's where we live.
Yay. Yeah. Cap, how about we move over to you?
Hello, everybody. I am Cap, he, him. You can find me majorly on Shrimp and Crits, another actual play podcast. We just finished a Monster of the Week season complete. We've been running some mini-series since then of different games. Favorite characters I've played, oh my goodness.
So many. You have a handful.
I do have a handful. Obviously, Ari Green is up there. Everyone's favorite. Reuben the raccoon, obviously. Oh, geez, who else? Maybe even Dorian on Monster Hour.
Yes.
I've
forgot
had
you
my
have
fair
so
share
many
of,
different voices.
Yeah, Monster Hour characters. Yeah, I'm Cap from podcasts. Shrimp and Crits on everything. Shrimpandcrits.com. It's cap.linktree.com for me personally.
And Lauren, could you remind everybody where they can find us?
Sure. So hi, you guys know me. I'm Lauren. You can find us here. You can also find us we're on like all the social platforms. It's mostly Monsters Playbook, except for X, which is, has character limits. So it's Monster Playbook and it's Monsters Playbook everywhere else. And we're at monstersplaybook.com. We also have a Patreon where I am currently running a mini series called House of Graves. So that is a lot of fun. We're getting to try out some of the new stuff from the Codex of Worlds book that came out earlier this year, or last year technically. Pronouns, she, her, and favorite characters. I feel like, Anna and Kira, absolutely. And then probably from our last mini campaign that we did over on Patreon, I played this sort of cyborg character named Echo, and she was a lot of fun because she was just...
You have to do the voice.
Well, she sort of talks like this, but you just imagine like a robot voice a little bit.
Awesome. I also go by she, her. My 3 favorite characters. How do I pick between my 2 favorite children? Murder on the Dance Floor? Yeah, that character, which of course I don't remember her name.
But I loved her.
Yeah, I loved her.
Is it Danny?
Probably. That sounds right. She's clearly my favorite because I remember her name. There's so many characters and they all just blend in. And then the character from our Patreon exclusive mini campaign for Blades in the Dark.
Wicker?
Yes, thank you. I knew it was a weird name and also not feminine. It was a guy. But yeah, I don't know. I love characters. And speaking of characters, gonna start with some easy warm-up questions. Where and how do you guys get your character names from?
For me, for character names, I'm kind of so my educational background is in English, so I'm a nerd for having names that like mean a specific thing or that's like thematically relevant to like the character. With Echo, for example, she like had this, she had been slowly turning cyborg, and so she was only like an echo of her former self. So I kind of liked that as like a name to kind of go with her. And so a lot of times I'll just do some research on like what name means like this thing, and then like I kind of just will look at like a list of baby names, and I probably get all the advertising like they think I'm gonna have a kid or something, but usually it's just kind of finding a name that I feel like kind of fits the vibe that I want to go for, and just doing some research on kind of thematically what do I feel like my character is kind of, I don't know, I'm just weird like that. I like it to fit and have a meaning behind it, so that's what I usually do.
I do the same
I
thing.
think we've all been to the babynames.com.
100%. I think a lot of these things, and I think a lot of the questions that we're going to get into today, I will have a different answer for you if I am making a character for an audience or making a character for a home game.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe not so much in the naming conventions, but
How you approach them.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I do the same thing though. I do a lot of one-name characters, your shares and things like that. I'm just looking through all my D&D characters here. I have an owl character called Tydo. Tydo is just like the Latin root for owl. I do a lot of that stuff. I play an Eladrin, who's like a plant elf named Cypress. A lot of taking names that are scientific names for things.
That's fun.
I feel like I cheat, and being here with professionals is going to make it really obvious how often I cheat. But for Constance, I knew I was going to be playing a Romanian, which I am. There's a little bit of like using the podcast as therapy with Constance that I feel a little bad about.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
it's the way it goes.
We're all doing it.
Okay,
We all
good.
do it. It's impossible not to.
And then you bring that character to therapy and your therapist thinks you're crazy.
Anyway, Constance is a common name. I've encountered a lot of Constances in the Romanian community, and I think a lot of that comes from like Constantine and Constantinople, and it's a whole thing. So I, like, in my head, I was just like, if I were playing a character that presented as a man, I probably would have picked Radu, which is another very common, or Sherban. But I ended up going with Constance because it sounded nice, and I knew it was a very common name, so it just made sense to do. But generally, when I'm not pulling from my background, I usually will like pick a guiding light to start out my character with, of like, my character is kind of like this with this mashed together, and use those as like to make sure that I'm being true to who the character is until I have a better sense of who they are on their own. And for Claire, the mashup for Claire on Monster Hour, which I know I'm not really talking about Claire today, but is supposed to be like, what if Gwyneth Paltrow were a ghost?
Nice.
And you're nailing it. I'll be honest.
And I thought about like Ghost Gwyneth Paltrow would have tried to buy Claire's, the thing in the mall, the shop in the mall back in the day, and that's where Claire came from.
I love that very much.
That is really fun.
In parallel, I did a similar thing with Ari. I knew Ari was Jewish like myself from the start. Ari a very common Jewish name. I took Green, one of my good friends, whose last name is Greenberg. I based the look of Ari completely off of him in real life. He is very well aware of that. So I just took the Berg off of it, and Ari Green came to be.
I know, Lauren, when we first started the cover story, obviously season 1 is not recorded, and started in Johnny's party room in his apartment. I think I chose Casey because I liked that it was a gender neutral name.
I like a lot of those names too. Yeah.
Yeah. And how did you pick Kira? Do you remember?
I don't remember. I think that one was kind of I just liked the name. Because we didn't have a lot of time, because true to like how the game is sort of supposed to play, like we weren't planning on doing it as a podcast at that time. So I liked the name, and we were just picking it for ourselves. And I don't know, I usually like shorter names for whatever reason, or at least names that like I can shorten down to have like a nickname. I don't know why, but yeah, Kira. Funny thing that I do remember is that I was fresh off of playing D&D. I hadn't played any other game systems, and so I think I originally spelled Kira completely different. Like I spelled it like a weird D&D way, and then I was like, wait, she's like a normal person. I don't need to do that. So
how many Y's?
I remember changing the spelling. It was like KYRRA or something, and then I changed it just to KIRA, and I was like, why did I do that?
Going off of that question, how do you build or choose your character's stats? Like, do you start with like the name first and you build the personality in the background and then you pick the stats, or the other way around? Does it influence you guys at all?
I was gonna say, I think names are usually after the fact for me. I think I usually try to get a vibe more of who the character is, and like stats sometimes play into that, but not always. I try to get a vibe for who the character is, and then I will build the stats around that. And then the name usually is in service to that too. So that's usually the kind of order of operations that I usually go, but it kind of depends sometimes. Sometimes the name might be like the first thing you think of, and you're like, ooh, I want to build around this one name. Like, just kind of depends on what comes first, but usually it's the vibe first, then the stats, and then the name.
I'm vibes first, for sure. Always about the vibes first. Stats used to be somewhat irrelevant to me in general, because...
I remember those early episodes, yeah.
Well, generally speaking, it's been an interesting journey for me as a player, because when, the same group of people that I play Monster Hour with, we were in a larger campaign of D&D together before we did Monster Hour. I alluded to my character in that campaign, Tippletoe. And in that campaign, in the D&D world, I would get very stat focused and very focused on like, I acquired this new skill, I want to use it. I acquired this new spell, I want to use it. And I found myself almost creating anxiety for myself of like, I need to find a way to use this thing today. And so I realized that for whatever reason, it's either or for me. I either like am all about my moves and what I can do, or I am just focused on the story and the character. And if I remember that I can do a thing, cool. And so I switched to the other side of that, to the vibes only side. And did not think at all about what stats Constance had, and kind of just relied on Quinn being a really good GM to be able to handle that well. So with our new campaign, with my new character Claire, I thought through who she is, and then was like, okay, what stats would make the things that she wants to do slightly more possible? I don't need her to be like a superhero on those things, but like, if she needs to be able to be weird and creepy, then maybe her stats need to make her weird and creepy, kind of thing. And that's kind of where I'm at this point. Is I'm still not a very strategic person with stats, but a little closer, a little more in the middle now.
Yeah, I think that's how I vibe too. Like, I just let the character kind of tell me how they're gonna be. Same with like specifically Monster of the Week. If something happened in that episode and I get to level up, okay, what in that episode would cause them to do and improving a skill or whatever. So like, oh, I was really charismatic in that session. Makes sense their charisma would go up or whatever.
Yeah, I agree a lot with what Tia said. I used to be very D&D minded about stats. my Monster of the Week, powered by the Apocalypse Mind, has completely taken over and bled into all of my home games as well, where I will, make a character and make stats, but having a GM that is good, it does not matter what your stats are. Because you got to roll the dice, you can get a crit or a crit fail, regardless of your stats. It really, truly doesn't matter. I just made an Absurdia character for a game that I am playing, a one-shot, and this character has 0 or minus on all stats except for pluck, which is +3. So I have I have one stat, and I am so excited.
Yeah. Sometimes that works out well.
It's so fun.
And if you play your character as your character, then you're going to be okay. Especially in a podcast world.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, and I was going to say, too, sometimes it's actually fun to play against stats. I found that to be the case with my second character in our podcast, Anna. She was built kind of against what I naturally gravitate towards, which is very sharp and weird characters. And she was not smart, and she was definitely more of like a bruiser and stuff like that. And one part of her character journey that I've really enjoyed was that she kind of started to become an apprentice of like a learning to become not a magician, but like a spell slinger, basically. And so that was against her, kind of what she was good at, what she was strong at. And so it kind of became a character journey for her to actually to move towards that. And so that was really fun too. And because like what you guys were saying, that's where it's really important to have a GM that you can really trust to kind of make that be a satisfying thing rather than this is just disappointing because I keep failing these rolls. Yeah. So I think as long as it's in service to your character and where you think you want your journey to go, I think the stats are just meant to kind of serve the vibes and the story. So
I'll also say my ick was turned on very hard to none of them are going to be listening to this, so I'm going to go ahead and say it. In my original D&D group, there were a lot of what you would call edgelords who would be very stat focused and try to do the coolest anime awesome action move that they could do every single round, and that turned me off completely to being anything like that.
Yes.
Yeah. I will say, and you're welcome to keep this in, even if they do hear it, I don't care.
I'll call them the fuck out.
Well, I did at the moment, too. It's just I hate playing with people who... I love that I say this as someone who 5 minutes ago said, I used my podcast as therapy in a way, or used it in that context. But I do hate when people... when I play with folks who are using, who feel like the place that they want to just always be winning, that they're trying to deal with the fact that they're unhappy about something outside of their podcast life. And so they need to win every time on every roll, on everything, and have the coolest move. And it's all about being main character syndrome, the coolest, and there's a fear of failure for their character. They're acting out some superhero fantasy, and I'm look, we all love having those moments. Those are really fun, and I think it's really exciting when you give people the space to do that. But if that's the entire reason you're playing the game, it's that's so exhausting. Definitely played those kind of D&D campaigns, and I'm well, I'm just gonna go over here and start a fire, and they're but that's I don't care anymore. I'm just starting a fire over here,
doing it.
Yeah, there's such a balance with not just only your own character, but then the characters you play with. Sorry, John. He sometimes is that character. He's is there a laundromat nearby? And we're we're in the middle of a fight. What are you doing? And I will admit and call myself out that I definitely struggled with the spotlight issue. Oh, I want to do this really cool thing. I want to feel important, and sharing that spotlight, learning to do that. It's hard, but to your point, having the characters that are murder hobos or just always want to do the cool thing, always want to do the difficult thing without going along with the story or what's going on is very tough.
Which again separates it from a home game and making a show for an audience.
Yeah.
So I think we can all trust each other if we were making a show right now, that if you were going on that launching that tangent, you were going somewhere with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that it would at least be
narratively
hilarious.
Interesting, at least narratively interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of hilarious, where do you guys get your inspiration from? Or what do you do to get inspired to create a new character?
Oh, wow. I mean, it could come from anywhere. Sometimes it's just driving down the road and seeing what funny voices you can make. That's the game I played with you all for Lost in the Wild, where we got Maggie, my little weird character, you know?
Yeah.
That I just found in the car. So I made a whole character off of
Oh,
that weird voice.
Iggy.
I admire people who can do
Yeah.
that. I know I'm just alone in the car, but like I can't get the nerve
That
up
was
to
so
do
cute.
it. I get
find
in my head.
A
I
way
do
to
it all the
learn your
time.
character's voice, which I've been doing for this character we're doing for our newest series right now, is to sing songs in that character voice. You sing along with music in the car. It helps you find the words that are hard to say in that voice if you have, a more intricate character voice. But singing
I
really
love
does help
that
expand.
advice.
That's very cool.
I'll have to try that. I love singing in the car, and I love doing character voices. Perfect.
I am tone deaf
Just
both
do
in
it
my
both.
normal voice and in my character voices, but it does help.
I love that. I'm going to try that.
Same.
Yeah, I recommend Disney songs. I mean, they are what they are, but you know the words to them already, so it does help.
And they actually say a lot of words in
Exactly.
Disney songs.
There's a lot of talking in Disney music.
Now I want to hear Iggy singing "Let It Go."
The one for the character I'm doing now is like a very smooth southern voice, and he works so well with "You're Welcome" from Moana.
Yes.
It's perfect. I don't remember what the original question was. No,
Yeah, I was
just
about to say,
talking
what are we
about singing
answering
there.
Where you get inspiration?
It comes from all sorts of sources for me. Sometimes it might be like a book I'm reading, and I'm like, oh, I really liked this one aspect of this character. I'd like to play with that a little bit. Or often it comes from like, for me, it's like, what do I want to explore sort of thematically? What sort of character journey am I interested in? I feel like that's usually kind of where I start. But sometimes it might also just be like a cool Pinterest post that I saw where I'm like, ooh, I like this character's like look and like vibe. And then like, what do I think their background is? And kind of going off of a tangent from that. But yeah, it just comes from lots of different places. I think every time I'm making a new character, I'm also kind of considering, I'm like, well, what haven't I done before? What can I try differently this time to make it kind of different from the things that I've done in the past? What story like beats and things am I interested in? And again, I think it differs from, home game and a podcast format, but it usually is something where it's like, where have I not gone before? What am I interested in exploring? That's usually kind of where my inspiration comes from.
You made me just pull up my Pinterest, and I have a 39 section My Characters Pinterest
wow.
board that has
I'm so glad I'm not alone.
1,630 pins. Yeah.
I love Pinterest.
I've got
wow.
we all have, definitely all have Pinterest.
I mean, I can take a single emotion and make a character from that. Like, Ari is a deeply sad character. He didn't know it until he learned that he was, controlled for all these years and getting his memory wiped and all of that. Spoilers for Shrimp and Crits.
You've been warned.
Originally, how I wanted to play Ari was if the Doctor from Doctor Who was a human and didn't have thousands of years to blow off all that rage and steam. So Ari started with my normal speaking voice and progressively got lower and slower the older and angrier he got. And I mean, that's up to the GM too, to give you that story. I went in with very little story for our first season, and it just built out through the narrative and gave me those things. I didn't go in with the vision of this end game of Ari, being in his apotheosis, powerful god, throwing people around.
Right.
When I didn't roll kick some ass once in our entire first season until the finale. Like, I kept it. I was a talker and a trapper and did not do that. And it's just, if you can really settle in on that one drive that your character has and not lose that, people will love that character if you don't forget the core values of that initial character and bring it through to the end.
Yeah.
I think Monster of the Week is, I think a lot, different game systems I'm sure are too, but Monster of the Week is one that I'm probably most familiar with this point, is really just inherently good at that too, with like the way that it's kind of built out into archetypes, where it's like, this will feed really well into like this kind of story or whatever that driving force is. And so I think it serves itself up very well for those kinds of stories.
From a mechanical standpoint, the asynchronous leveling in Monster of the Week, I think, helps group dynamic a lot, because we'll have somebody who's leveled up so many times from failure and someone who hasn't leveled up once in a few arcs, you know, and it really changes things around. We all love Monster of the Week here.
Yes,
shout out to Michael Sands.
Yeah.
I will say, yeah, it's interesting. I'm laughing just because I'm imagining Kyle's response to this. My poor husband Kyle, who plays a character on our podcast next to me often in this same room I'm recording in right now. Him and I have very different approaches, and I didn't really realize how different your approach could be until I was actively recording a Monster of the Week podcast with someone else who, like, 3 hours before we record, he has reviewed his notes. He knows what's happening in the episodes.
Wow.
He has a long backstory for his character. Like, he comes in, fully prepared. And for him, it's I mean, I don't want to speak for him, but knowing him, it's part of his, like, he never wants to feel unprepared, because just the feeling of being unprepared in a space will psychically mess with him when he's trying to, like, make decisions on the fly. I'm the exact opposite. If I prep, I overthink it. So I literally have no idea what's happening at any point in time. I walk in 2 minutes before we start recording with a soda, and I'm like, where are we again? And have to ask every time.
You do. You bring that into your character a lot, though, in a spectacular way, especially Claire.
Yeah, Claire. Well, Claire's also the benefit of Claire is quite spacey in a lot of ways, but a big part of it is that what I really love, I think definitely with Monster of the Week, I think less so with D&D, which is one of the reasons why I'm a big Monster of the Week and Absurdia proponent, is that, like, you can't really fully develop the arc of your character because it is so dependent on everything else that happens, right? All the interconnected relationships. And so for me, I love that, because I basically will come up with, I love fish out of water scenarios. That's kind of my go-to. And so I'll just come up with, like, what if Ghost Gwyneth Paltrow lived in a small town? What would that look like? That's for my current one. For Constance, it was like, what if, like, being a weird art girl whose Romanian family is overbearing happened in this, like, strange version of the Hellmouth, essentially. And how would she deal with that and never becoming, like, a famous artist kind of thing? That will just be like I'll, like, come up with that, whatever the fish out of water premise is, that I just am interested in seeing how that goes, and have no plans for, like, long story arc. So for folks who are fans of Monster Hour, I will say that a lot of times those moments where you're like, oh, this is, spoilers for season 1, but the paintings have, like, clues in them, 100% made up on the fly between Quinn and I in the moment of recording. That's not even, like, a pre-talk. That just happens as we, like, go through it. And similar things, I will say, I don't think this is spoiling anything, but for season 2, the well did not have significance until it did. And that also happened in the moment. So I love that, because I love the creative spirit of it with other players. And I really like what you said about Cap, about the leveling up. I think that is really interesting, because I think it also kind of, like, at least in our podcast, it goes to this sense of some characters will grow at different rates than others.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's just kind of like a neat element that mimics a real life group in a way that, like,
absolutely,
you don't get in D&D and other places.
Right.
You making a one-off joke about paintings having secrets in them got me a job and an episode, so I can't thank you enough for that one.
Wait, really? I don't know
For
this.
Dorian.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that makes sense.
That's the whole shtick of that episode.
Well, there you go. You're welcome.
Collaborative storytelling at its finest.
Like, I was thinking back when you were talking to you about the D&D characters that I've played, and I, of course, have made these just, like, background ideas, like, oh, I want my character to do this, and I feel like, aside from one character, did I really get to experience the path of that character. But yeah, I do love that with Monster Week, that each character grows with different experiences and are different levels, and get to see them change as things evolve. One question I have, I thought was kind of interesting. I think it's an obvious question, but how hard do you guys try to not replicate previous characters you've played? Or are you just kind of like, I don't care?
I think about this a lot. A lot. Especially when it comes to voices, I want every voice that I put on the podcast to sound different than the last one. That's a big thing to me. I want to go into, if anybody knows anybody, please let me know. If I could get cast as a cartoon character of some sort, I would love to do that. I can do a lot of cartoony voices, and I love doing them. So voices are a big thing to me. I don't want to sound the same. Mm-hmm. I think a benefit of what we do, a lot of our stories are in very different locations. Mm-hmm. So it is hard to play a similar character. We're going into fantasy now, so I'm not going to play a character that's similar to anything we've played before in modern settings. I'm playing a beefy boy right now. That's very different than anything I play. I usually play, cerebral characters in that way, or strange little magic guys. But I think making yourself step into, if it's D&D, a different class than you've played before, or just a different trope, archetype character, you should do that as a player to test yourself. Mm-hmm. And I know that's saying from a point of a narrative podcast that we want to create new content, Mm-hmm. But even in your home games, you should try to play things you've never played before. You might find you like it more than the other thing.
Mm-hmm. Right. And there are some people who they'll play like a very similar character, time and time again. But yeah, for me personally, I like to play different characters. I think there's some through lines that you'll see from character to character, depending on, what you're playing and the system and the setting. But I do generally try to have some what you were saying earlier, Cap, it's what's that driving force, and trying to make sure that is unique and distinct between each character. And I think by virtue of having that, you will have a different experience between different characters, and adding some of the other things on top to kind of make them stand out too. Whether it be a voice or, their background, things like that. I think that kind of just helps to enrich it. But yeah, kind of having that core driving principle or that center of who they are, I think that's important to kind of ground yourself and make it distinct from one character to the next.
And I don't want people to feel, if you don't like doing voices, that's totally fine.
You don't have to.
I would suggest maybe switch up your cadence, and that could change a character completely. Talk in a way that you do not talk in your normal day life, and you will feel more in that character's shoes than you did when you were just using your regular voice.
Right. It doesn't have to be an accent, doesn't have to be...
Exactly.
That's how I felt with Casey and Theo. I've played two characters in our podcast, and Casey's very me. Casey's very kind of, I don't know, I've always seen my voice as being kind of, not necessarily monotone, but just...
more relaxed.
Yeah, relax is a better way to say it. But that's Casey. But then I was like, Lauren and I, we've come across this, how do we differentiate between these two characters that we sometimes often play at the exact same time? So Theo is a little bit more higher and just more penny, and in certain situations she talks really fast, and that, and Casey doesn't do that. Casey's kind of slower and stuff, but I try and find even just simply putting your voice a little higher, putting your voice a little bit lower. Also just the pacing. And I know we've talked a little bit about just how you're positioning things. Casey's probably sitting a little bit taller. Theo's more shy and not necessarily hunched over, but just kind of hiding herself.
I didn't know that. We recorded it was some anniversary. We did a TikTok with our faces on camera, and I did some voices of the characters, and I did not realize how differently I sit and move my body for the different... I'm
your posture,
throwing myself around, switching between different voices.
That's fascinating. I love that. I love that you're all thinking about that. And Cap, I really appreciate the commitment you make to that. That is something that I genuinely struggle with, is I am notoriously terrible at voices. Hilariously, I am Romanian and I cannot do a Romanian accent. Someone speaking English.
You do the cadence very well, though. Claire is very different than Constance.
Yeah, Claire's cadence is borrowed from Taco from Taz. And now that I say that, you won't unhear it when you... Whoa.
I too have played a character in a home game that is Taco from Taz.
That's
I know this life.
Yeah, it's because it's a really easy thing to do, kind of like in that flippanty kind of. That's
And I'm better than everybody else.
Yes, it's exactly.
And I know it.
Yeah. So yeah, I play around with cadence. It is something that I am interested in kind of like pursuing more in a future character. I mean, to the point of. I've only done two public characters, and when we do kind of one shots or for some of our Patreon folks, we do games with them, personal games, and that's when I'll like experiment outside of my norm, both in voice and also I think a bit outside of my like fish out of water aesthetic, and find that I actually really enjoy it. And I think the reason I don't stray as far when building a new character for the podcast is because I'm trying to think like, what can I jump into and be able to improv really well in the moment for a long-term commitment.
Yes.
Which is different from like, I'm gonna live inside the space of this. Like, for me, I think the greatest departure would be playing a super physical fighter. I think that would be so outside of my norm.
Yeah.
And I've done it for some one-offs and realized that it required a lot of concentration. It's almost like, it's like speaking in a different language in a lot of ways, where you have to think about what you're saying as you say it, which takes out some of the like spontaneous creative choices for me, at least. But it's something that I think is really valuable for folks to do, not just if you do a podcast that other people listen to, but I think it's just like, it's a fun way to kind of like evaluate why you make the choices you make when you do, and it makes you a more collaborative player if you can like play in different realms. So it's definitely something that I'm looking to do more of, and as we think about what our season 3 is for Monster Hour, that's one of the things I'm like, I want to step outside of my norm in a lot stronger ways.
You and I are in unique positions. We got to play characters on each other's shows in very normal episodes.
Yes.
I was sad I did not get to play Claire.
You would have done an incredible job. I also was sad about that.
How many of you are like theater kids or did acting?
I'm raising my hand. This is a podcast. What am I doing?
I am not. However, Kyle is not only a theater kid, he's a theater man. He's literally at a theater right now as we record this, working on a show, and almost all of his friends. All his friends that he knows not via me are theater kids. I'm a Politico kid, which is, I argue, similar.
I was never a theater kid. I was theater kid adjacent. I was friends with a lot of the theater kids. I tried out for one thing once because I was forced to do so, and got on stage, read the lines. I have no memory of it. It was a complete blackout situation.
Oh, man.
I didn't get the part, which is fine. But I have been playing TTRPGs since, I was on like online forums where you would role play like fantasy stuff like that without rolling dice or anything, and then got into D&D through Ryan from my show. He got me in, and it's been 10 years since that. So my experience is in playing games.
I was gonna say, that was the thing that was been missing like my entire life. Like, I feel like I'm still relatively new to like TTRPGs. I only really started it back in like 2019, and so like, which I guess is like already 5 years. Wow. But like, I remember when I first started playing it, I was like, how did I not know that this was like a thing that you could like role play, and it's basically just like acting and it like scratches. Like it's a cat. Scratches that itch.
Scritches is what we call like when we give head scratches to our dog.
Exactly.
We call them scritches.
Yes, exactly.
You can scratch yourself, I guess.
It's giving me the little scritches of acting.
I find that really interesting because I was talking to a coworker of mine, and they gave me the compliment of like, your voice is great for like a podcast. And I was like, oh, I used to like hate my voice. And I was like, I was not a theater kid at all. I was like, I got a degree in like film, hated being in front of a camera, whether it's a video camera or a camera. Jonny was kind of a theater kid, right, Lauren?
He might have been in a few things, but I mean, he's a
outgoing.
performer.
Yeah. And John was a big theater kid. And like, same with you, Tia. Like, my husband, theater kids, his family, theater musicians, and like his friends are all theater musicians, performance. So that's very, different. And I was same, Lauren, like, oh, where was this? But for me, it was more like the story writing of it, creating this story.
Yeah, I was gonna say TTRPGs games, they take all kinds, and I think like if you have a love of storytelling, it doesn't matter if you were a theater kid or not. I think it just that collaborative storytelling is like really, I feel like the core for me, and it gives me a rush when I get to play, and I think it's just been fun no matter how you got here.
Miah, I'm with you. I did not like my voice at all. I'll be honest, don't like my voice. But the thing is, and I think is true for all of us on this call, we have unique voices. And that is so important in what we do as podcasters, is to not sound like everyone else. I am very lucky on our show. We all sound very different. You know, Ian has that musical background. He is very sing-songy. Ryan sounds like a swamp creature, which is incredible. Katie is also very unique. Like, I am so lucky to have unique voices.
Yeah, and unique point of views too. Different backgrounds.
You know, not to make us go long, I know we have other questions and whatnot, but it is really interesting. It is really interesting to hear kind of everyone's backdrop in there. I really appreciated, Lauren, what you said about like, where was this? But it's storytelling. That's really like the key. Because oddly enough, like I'm sorry, I keep bringing up the podcast I'm on. I swear this is not some sort of like guerrilla marketing. I promise.
Dare you.
I mean, we are here to talk about those characters as well.
Well, it's just funny because for those who don't know, the Monster Hour is Quinn, Kyle, my husband, Hannah, and myself. So taking Kyle, the one theater kid in our group, the only theater kid in our group, out of the equation, the three of us, Quinn, Hannah, and I, we all went to college together. We were all in Young Democrats together. That's how we know each other, is through politics. And none of us played any kind of role-playing, any kind of board game, tabletop game, anything together the entire time we went to college. All of it was post-college, and Quinn had been playing D&D with a different group for a while, so he kind of like had that, but he came at it from the like strategy stats zone, and so my introduction through him was that thing that we talked about we don't like, which is like being really obsessed with like your stats and your win conditions and all that kind of thing. And so that was how I originally approached it, and didn't really appreciate the storytelling aspect of it until I met Kyle, who very, very promptly, as soon as like we played together, was like, you are so type A when you're doing this. Like, are you actually having fun doing this? Or are you trying to win with like, why?
Yeah.
And he opened me up to the idea of like, he would prompt me with like, well, wouldn't it be more interesting if your character did this at this moment? I was like, but then I lose. And he's like, but does it matter? Isn't that kind of great? And he kind of opened me up to the storytelling journey side of things. And that's when I started to realize, oh, this is like an outlet for me, improv, because I do a lot of bits. I'm a bit person. If we hang out at a bar, I'm gonna end up creating a whole fake language with you out of random bits. We're gonna create a universe, world building out of bits, and I didn't really clock that as like a big component of TTRPGs until basically my husband told me that that's a thing. Which is like, not to give Kyle all the credit, but kind of. And I think that I won't speak for Quinn or Hannah on their journeys, but I think all of us have become very different players than we were even the first time we sat down together to do it. So yeah, it's interesting.
I will say, as a fan of your characters and of your show, season 1 was incredible, but you all found your rhythm in season 2 by bringing in that minutia of politics.
Yeah, that we all
Because
clearly are.
it is heavily that. It really is heavily that in such a way that is enjoyable and not feeling like I'm filling out forms when I'm listening to Monster Hour. But it's such a beautiful thing you've done by bringing those two worlds together for season 2. It's a joy to listen to.
Yeah. Can you tell that we've worked in politics at some point? Anyway, that's a whole...
There's a book that I've read about writing, and there was a phrase that that the author uses a lot. I think it's like specificity breeds authenticity. And so the idea that politics background is something that is very like core to your group, and that's something that you know, because you guys have been so steeped in it, like it just reads as authentic when you can do it because you're so specific and it's so like true to your background. So I just think that's fun to bring into no matter what character you're playing. If there's some truth, some specific thing that you can bring, then that kind of will shine through. So that's another thing that I think can really lead to very specific and unique characters.
In the way that you all do that with politics, we do that like we are all old Southern people sitting on a porch, talking back and forth with no end in sight.
Exactly.
Like in character, talking and talking, and it will never end until Ian yells at us.
Which Ian is good at.
Or like, or Tio with Constance, because Constance was like obsessed with Buffy too, right? Yes. I'm like, that's clearly like pulling from Tio, but I loved it. As also a Buffy stan, so yeah.
Oh man, speaking of, one last thing. I shot myself in the foot, speaking of drama kids. Ari, well-versed in Shakespeare. Me, Cap, not well-versed in Shakespeare.
No,
Everyone thinks I am some sort of thespian when I'm just sitting here Googling Shakespeare quotes and using them.
I love
Macbeth.
that secret.
Othello.
Mind you, now I know a lot more about Shakespeare than I did before, but...
That's incredible. I love that you're learning because you have to learn the like hobbies and interests of your character.
Exactly.
Also, Lauren, that quote is incredible. I literally, I made a note to myself about the specificity, authenticity. That's so cool.
Oh yeah, I need to make sure I have the right book. Let me get it.
Yeah. While you're looking, let me ask this quick question. What kind of pitfalls do you think a person can fall into when creating a character?
I think being adverse to change and adverse to... You should have a good relationship with your GM, and you should trust your GM if you're in a long-term game. And pushing away from what they're doing will put you in a spot that makes your character very flat, is I think the best way I can put that. It's just trusting your other players and your GM will help you avoid a lot of pitfalls that you can back yourself into a corner with as a character.
I agree. I think that's a big one. I'll point out, we already kind of talked about it, so I'll just make sure it's in the right question category, is just make sure it lines up to the right spot, is, kind of what we talked about before of like, main character syndrome. Like really, really be careful that you are contributing, especially if it's for other people to listen to, but even in your own games, like, that you are contributing to a group dynamic rather than just about yourself and your character. And sometimes that means your character will change in a way you didn't expect, and that can be kind of cool.
Sometimes you will create a character that maybe down the road will have a choice to make that you are not comfortable making as a player. And that can be very difficult, and that's just something you need to talk to your GM about. But you need to try to keep it comfortable for yourself and for everyone at the table, which is hard to say because you can't tell the future, obviously, but decision making can put you into pitfalls, especially if you're trying to win.
Right. Yeah, and I think also with like because of the nature of how these games are supposed to play, it's improv, right? So I think just don't get it in your head that like this is the outcome that needs to happen or like it needs to be this way, because I think that will just lead you to disappointment if it doesn't go exactly the way that you're thinking. Just try to be open and really lean into that. The fact that it is supposed to be an improv game, the unexpected is going to happen. And rather than seeing that as like, that's not where I wanted that to go, think of it as, oh, well, that's a cool character journey that I could maybe dive into, or how would I react to this? Because I think it can lead to interesting things when you're open.
Yeah, I think that lends to like flexibility versus rigid, being able to be flexible, not going in. So you said like, this is how the story is going to go, or I want it to go, and then feeling disappointed if it doesn't go that way. But then also like, if it's maybe not going in that direction or in a way that you want your character to grow, speaking with your GM and making sure you're comfortable with those conversations.
I was just going to say, that's something that is always good to talk with your GM, where it's like, I kind of loosely want to play with like these themes and stuff like that. And like, I'm interested in these things. And I think that's a fair conversation to have. But then it's important to be able to then trust your GM to, if they do something that maybe is unexpected, like just to know that that might be an interesting, development for you. So,
I don't know how often this comes up for you all, but for me, especially when I play slightly more like grading characters like Claire, but even at moments, some of the I'll actually use an example from Constance. Again, spoilers. Like there is a point in the rift between Constance and her mother where, things get really intense, and Constance feels like her mother has endangered people, right? Other people. And, we finished recording that episode, and we're just kind of like debriefing for a second, planning some stuff. And Quinn asked me, he's like, Tio, does Constance want to kill her mom? Like, is that actually a thing that you want us to set up, or is Constance just really mad right now? Like, I just kind of want to know. And I sat and I thought about it for a second, and my initial gut reaction was to say, no, she doesn't, because I didn't like, me as a person was having like moral judgments about Constance's actions because I was fangirling, or I was like rooting for my character in a specific way. But then I like sat with it and I was like, no, if I'm being honest about like, it's okay if I don't like every decision that Constance makes. Like it's okay. And the truth is that at that moment, given the stakes of what was happening, Constance was not, there was a way that things could have gone where Constance did kill her mom in her mind as like a way to, as like part of just like the war, the battle that was going on. And it would have been a hard decision to make, but there were things that could have happened that would have led to that as a very realistic outcome for Constance. Mm-hmm. And I didn't like that. And I was also, the extra element of something that's for public consumption. Yeah. I was like, oh man, especially for people who know that like there is a little bit of connectivity between Constance and myself and my relationship with my mom, but it's not actually the same, right? It's just based off of. Yeah. And I had a moment of worry of like, oh, people who know me and my mom are gonna, if that is what happens, they're gonna see that and be like, damn, Tio, like, whoa, I didn't know things were like that. And I like was debating backing away from it because I didn't want the backlash that I would get from it. And that was one of those hard moments where I'm glad Quinn asked the question because it made me have to confront it. But also, things didn't go that way. Obviously, a different, more interesting choice was made. But I needed it. Like reminded me that like sometimes you have to like be honest about your character and their choices, and you don't have to always like it. And I think trying always to like your character can be a pitfall for their growth as a character too. I think there's a balance there, but
or even making sure your character always wins
or always is good
I
or makes the right
point.
choice. Yeah.
I had a kind of similar but opposite at the end of our show. Ari was basically given the opportunity to reshape history and the world in a way that none of the bad things happened, thus himself becoming some sort of god, not in a good way, or the choice to sacrifice himself. Everything would go back to normal, but the bad stuff now would be gone. And if I was at home in a home game, I probably would have picked the first option and become some sort of evil puppeteering god character that fixed the world in the way that he saw. Which I would have loved to see a what if episode of our podcast where that happened, but
Do it.
Patreon content.
Yeah.
but obviously I went to save the world.
Yeah.
You know, so the ultimate sacrifice.
I love that you two, Tio and Cap, have very similar experiences as like I think Lauren and I have. I'm just thinking about the episode I'm editing right now, Lauren, A Bird in the Cage, where Kira faces her dad, and it's intense. And did you know that you're gonna have to face your dad at one point, or was it just kind of like, oh, I am facing my dad?
I think that was something that I did not know was going to happen. That was something that, I mean, Jonny and I had talked about at length at some of my backstory with Kira, and there's some very dark things there. And when it came up in the episode, I wasn't expecting it, and that definitely caught me off guard. But I have a lot of trust in Jonny that I knew that it was going to be okay, and that it would be a good step forward, I think, in her journey as something to confront. And yeah, I just took a second to kind of reorient myself, and I think it was okay.
It's an emotional, we're going to get into that question later, but it is an emotional job recording for a podcast as a character that you are not.
Yep.
But we'll talk about that more later.
Speaking of these characters, so with Ari and Constance and I want to say Kira, how did you come up with them? I know, Cap, you touched on you had a friend that you based the appearance on Ari for, but like, where did that come from? Like, you're sitting down and like, okay, we're gonna do a campaign, we're gonna do a podcast. Where were you just like, this is my character, and you're presenting it?
Ian gave us the layout. Southern town, things are going wrong, figure out what's going on, you know. I wanted to play the fish out of water. So Ari is from New York. That's always been a thing for the character, very antithetical to Florida. Well, not so much, you know, they all fly south. But he was initially a Fox Mulder type. I like that. I want to believe, you know, always in a suit. Katie was originally going to play a Scully type, where we were both investigators going there to figure out what was wrong. Katie eventually became Sarah, but I wanted to stick with that cold agent style, which, you know, throughout the show becomes more of a conditioning that was done to him, not his personality type. And we get a lot more of his personality once he stopped having his memory wipe and being conditioned, in which I could start having fun. And I like to make jokes. I like to do comedy. Ari started to get funny as much as he was dry and mean later on, which was not really allowed for him in the first 75% of our show. I didn't know I wanted to be that character. I wanted to be the cold, calculated, unlike my true self in real life character. And then it just unfolded. It blossomed from there with the story. But yeah, the initial idea, a cold agent from the north coming to the south, sweating in his suit while everybody else was wearing flip-flops and shorts.
I love that. Constance, it was pretty quick, because when we first started recording, we had no concept of how long we would be recording. And I think, honestly, I mean, I don't know if this is true for the other members of our team, but I'll say for me, I think in my mind, we were recording not for other people, but just as an excuse to make sure that we actually did continue to do the podcast or continue to play together. It was just like, well, we have to. We said we were recording it. We're putting it out there. And so in my mind, you know, an audience didn't really exist for about a year because since my agreement to do the podcast was I don't want to have to do any of the podcast production stuff because that's like at the time that was a big part of my job at work. I basically got to pretend that nobody was hearing it for quite a while. And to be honest, that is kind of still how I operate. I am not involved in any of our promotion. I'm
so jealous.
I will do this thing where, like, if I'm pulling an all-nighter for work, which is rare but not that rare, and I need like a real palate cleanse, I will open our Discord and read the last like 5 or 6 weeks worth of what people have said, and it's very exciting.
Wow.
But I am but that's why I'm in and out of there. I pop in, I say hello. You'll see me like rapid fire liking everyone's stuff, and then I'm gone for months.
John is just like that too. You're like John,
I'm
and
so
I'm like
sorry.
Kyle.
Or Kyle will send me. He'll be like, someone did a thing about Claire, did a thing about Constance. I'm like, oh, that's so cool. So because of that, my character development was very much, at least for Constance, very much just like my random thought. I wasn't taking into account how it would be perceived by other people, for better or for worse. And I knew I wanted to do a Romanian character even before we knew the setting. We had been playing around with the idea of having it set in New Mexico. And, we ultimately, landed not on New Mexico, obviously, but it was just like we didn't know exactly where, but we knew that it would have some sort of kind of like creative and artistic community nearby. And as someone who is a news designer in my life, that intrigued me. And so I was like, I know I want them to be Romanian because I don't see many Romanian characters, and it's just one of those things that I felt I could do authentically because I am Romanian, and I was very nervous to play a human that wasn't close enough to to my background that I would feel like I was appropriating or misrepresenting something. So Romanian it was, and then they happened to also be artistic. Oh gosh, I'm basically playing an exaggerated, absurd version of myself. But then very quickly Constance veered off into her own thing, which is very different from me in a lot of ways. But that was honestly like the thought process behind it, which is not very well thought out, and it kind of just snowballed from there. I think the one added element that was very much of my personal life and I wanted to play with because I knew that it would resonate with people, and it did. So yay, was the kind of the setup of like Constance's mom and dad are both like big figures in the community, especially in an academic sense. And Constance is not. And that like push and pull, which is a lot bigger at the beginning. And, we kind of like go in a different direction with it later with the lab. That was very much borrowed from my real life. In Romanian culture, because of like the 2-second Romanian history lesson of Romania was taken over by a dictatorship and became communist under a dictatorship. And there was a massive kind of like brain drain that went on. It was all of your land was taken. All this stuff happened. And that was like the life that my mom grew up in, was communist dictatorship Romania. And her entire generation and her parents' generation, the big like resounding thing that, that kind of like stuck with them, the big value that stuck with them from that experience was like, at any moment, at the drop of a hat, your entire world can change. Whoever they is, can take everything from you, everything you've ever worked for, but they cannot take what is in your mind. And therefore, education is the number one most important thing in the world. They will never take what you know. And so that thought, though, makes sense from where it comes from and is kind of beautiful and poetic in a lot of ways, translates to, if you do not have a PhD, you are not a valuable human. And that is honestly a very big thing that like, me as an American Romanian, I mean, I was still born in Romania, but like grew up here mostly. I struggle with, and I fight back, is like, not everyone has the same opportunity. Institutionalized racism is a real thing. The Ivy League, the ivory tower, there are a lot of problems in viewing that as intelligence. Anyway, I come from a totally different perspective than even my cousins who grew up in Romania but are my age.
Right.
So I wanted to kind of like have a character that had that fight, at least on the sideline, and never fully address it. But for people who like know what that's about, they can experience that. And I definitely got people who messaged me and was like, oh man, I feel this hard. Like I have this talk a lot with my parents. And I'm like, yes, yay.
I think it's so, you and I both did that for our first characters. We both took the culture that we grew up and learned and made a character off that, mine being Jewish and your being Romanian. That is, that's fascinating, honestly, because a lot of those things can be said about both, you know?
That's really cool.
I am forever sad Constance and Ari never got to meet.
No.
Yeah.
Spin-off.
I found the actual quote,
Oh,
which
yay.
actually feeds in really nicely to what you were just saying, Tio. It's specificity breeds universality, not authenticity. So, which is actually kind of similar, but it's a little bit different. But it's basically the idea that every individual person brings their own past, present, and future to their storytelling experience, and then they impose their own worldview onto your story. So exactly what you were just saying about Tio, about like this experience that I have with this Romanian, culture, and kind of their worldview of, intelligence is the end all be all. I think that's a thing that a lot of other people can latch onto because they have their own experience in some way. And so, yeah, I think that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Constance literally had the past lives move as well, correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
Where you could speak to generations. Yeah, that is a very cool way to bring that into your character.
Thank you. Yeah. But Cap, you were alluding to your background played into that. I'm just curious, like, what does that mean for your character exactly? Like, connect the dots for me or for the audience on that.
Of being a person of Jewish heritage?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's going to sound a little stereotypical, but I suppose I can say it. My family is Italian and Jewish, like perfectly split down the middle. There is a lot of guilt in both of those cultures, generational guilt and just straight up guilt to your face. Ari's whole thing, which it turned out to be, was guilt and manipulation through magical means, as well as just straight up manipulation to be this soldier of the enemy. And he spent his whole life being that. He was taken from childhood and raised in this regime, which obviously, is a metaphor for many things that have happened in history, and basically taught to arrest the people that he was fighting to save. We get some of that. There's a character called Zegnar, who is just trying to save his daughter. Ari lets him go and then goes back and arrests him, which kind of kicks off a lot of the whole campaign, and he ends up being beheaded by the Council of the Fae, and a lot of that weighs on Ari. There's just, really, I took the most negative thing, sadly, the generational guilt and fear, and I put that into Ari, and his whole storyline is, overcoming that generational fear and just being who someone told him he has to be through force. And, that's a lot of me as a person. You have these things laid out for you, much like you said, where you have to do these certain things and be this certain person. I was not raised as a practicing Jew. I just am genetically that.
Yeah.
But I spent a lot of time with, unfortunately, she won't know this. She has passed from this world. My grandma is my character, Reuben the Raccoon, who is that I played Jackie in this voice as well. This is just how my grandma talked. So I take a lot of that. She smoked like 100 cigarettes a day. She just sounded like that. I want her to live on through this ridiculous character voice that I do. But yeah, really just that. I saw Ari so vividly in my brain, and an advice that I'll give to players who want to start doing a podcast. We played just under 10 games as our characters unrecorded, so we could flesh them out, which is a double-edged sword because we treated each other as friends in our first episode in a way, and that we had to remind ourselves we don't know each other. Advice to all of you out there: play a few games first so you can learn how these characters talk and act and feel about situations. A lot of Ari's nonviolence comes from that. He does not want to be a force of violence in this world, so he didn't shoot a bullet till the last episode of the show out of his gun. So I don't know if I answer your question. There's just a lot of generational guilt that I brought into Ari. which the show and doing therapy along with doing season 1 really helped me break through a lot of that. And I recommend that to all of you who are playing very serious characters. And then go play a silly, cartoon snowman afterwards, because it'll help a lot.
I second that.
Yes.
Yep, third.
I don't know if I have a ton to add on. So Kira is kind of a unique situation because when we started recording this, we were just playing it for ourselves. We did not have intentions of doing it as a podcast at the time. So my process or whatever for creating her really was just filling out the sheet and then kind of thinking what kind of character archetype was interesting, because I think Jonny had printed out all of the different playbooks and was choose one, and then I was eyeing a couple, and I was one of the reasons I was so interested in playing the game was because I'm such a huge Buffy fan, and I was ooh, the monstrous, it's like Angel and Spike kind of, and I was that sounds fun.
And you wanted the weapon that Buffy gets later.
Her scythe that she has, that was her chosen weapon when she turned to be the Chosen, and I'm just a huge Buffy fan, so I was sitting there thinking, and I was just oh, I like that, the kind of, the person who's dark but actually wants to kind of redeem themselves, and that was the core of Kira was she has a lot of shame and guilt from her past, similar to Ari, where it's I want to be different from that background. I want to be something else, and so it's kind of this atonement journey for her, and that was kind of really, I think, the core of what started with Kira was just this that background and wanting to be seen as something better and something different, and kind of the goodness that she was trying to do to outweigh all the bad.
Love that.
So that was kind of her journey.
I wanted to ask Lauren, you were talking about your character creation and taking inspiration from Buffy. So where did DID come from? And remind me what that stands for again. And if you don't want to talk about it, we don't have to.
Yeah, it's fine. So I guess a small content warning for anyone dealing with this mental illness, but this was something that was not planned. It just kind of happened through exploring the character of Kira. She comes from a cult background, and there's a lot of trauma in her past. And so at some point, Jonny and I kind of, through discussions, we said that, she had alternate personalities in her head, which dissociative identity disorder is the proper technical term for what some people might call multiple personality disorder. Tio, you maybe said this a little bit too. It's there's this fear of am I appropriating something? I've definitely had that, especially because this was not something that was ever going to go out to the public. And then all of a sudden we're doing a podcast, and I was oh no, is that going to be a thing I need to change? Is that going to offend somebody if I have that? So that was a very real fear of mine. But I think the important thing for me was trying to just make sure that I was doing it with care and not, trying to be offensive in any way, and just with all the right intentions. I think that's the core. If you're ever playing anybody of some diverse background from you, I think that's just important to remember. But it really just came through Jonny and I. We, back in 2020, when we were all locked in with the pandemic, we started playing. This was before this was ever a podcast. We were just chatting back and forth, and we were doing some kind of text RPs in between some of our sessions of because I think he had asked the question one time, because we had never really gotten into it. And he's have we ever talked about Kira's parents? And I was no. And he's do you want to maybe explore that a little bit? And I was sure. And so I think he had me roll some dice, and was I want you to just roll a manipulate someone roll. And I was okay. And I rolled a 4, I think. It was a failure. And so he's oh, I'm sorry in advance. And he's and basically he was so I think there's some bad things that have happened. I don't think you have a lot of memories of what happened. And basically it was kind of revealed that she had an abusive, traumatic childhood. That kind of led from there, and I think we were doing weird RPs where Kira was talking to her in-game therapist. It was that somehow came to light, and it really just came through in discussions. And I think at one point Jonny, as the character Mendy, who is the therapist at our organization that was in the game, had asked Kira to write a letter to herself or something, and then that's how it came out. It was in that letter that we basically just discovered that, and it just kind of was something that we ran with and became kind of core to her identity and her personality. And Yeah, it wasn't anything that I started from the outset, but I think like any interesting things that happen in these games, it comes through play and through discovery, and that's kind of how that developed.
You know those memes where it says, "This is how it started, and this is how it's going."
I was not expecting
How
that.
it's
Sorry.
going.
What does or did that look like for your characters? Like I know all of our characters, they're wrapped. I mean, for the Monsters Playbook, not all of our episodes are out, but our fans do know that we are done recording. What does that look like for your characters? How did it start? How was it going?
It started sad, it ended sadder. No. Kira started pretty actually it's a lot
in a cult.
It's almost the opposite of that. I think it started like with Kira, of her very like self-loathing and a lot of guilt and shame about her background, and I think it is moving in a direction, since we're not done yet, it's moving in a direction of actual hope and purpose, I think, and moving forward instead of looking back. And which is, as the Monstress, that's what she constantly was doing, was she was always looking back at her past. She had the dark past move. It was not good. And so it was like, let's move it in the opposite direction into a thing that's transformative and good and hopeful. So that's I think how it's trending and how it's going.
Mine's quick. It started with Constance being kind of a goofy fish out of water with some, more serious Romanian undertone things, as we've talked about. I knew from the get-go I wanted Constance to die. Spoiler alert.
Me too. I'm with you on that one. I was like day one.
Day one?
There's one in every group.
It's one of those things that was surprising to me, in that, like, it was still an emotional moment, even though from the get-go I was like, ooh, maybe this will kill her. Like, that sounds terrible, but like, there's, as you get later in season 1, I don't remember if they got edited out or not, but there were multiple moments where I was like, well, if I do this, it could kill her. And Quinn's like, T.O., we're not done.
Those are in.
Yeah.
Those are still in there.
All
Don't worry.
I have never listened back.
That was
Again,
there.
I walk in, I do a thing, it's like a fugue
Love it.
state, and I leave.
I'm just the talent.
I just work here.
I need it that way. No continuity for me. So I mean, that's obviously how it ended, and I knew that's what I wanted. I can't explain exactly why. I think I was just like, I want to do something I can't do in real life, which is like root for the death of this character, I like have it be a spectacular blowout. And I will say it is a spectacular blowout. Like the way, she goes down in a sea of glory. I don't know what to call that. A blaze of glory. Anyway, but she does it having like, I think I had no idea how it was going to happen or what the like thing about it was going to be, but I think it ended in a way better place than I could have come up with on my own, which again is the strength of Monster of the Week. Of like, in my thought, a great character arc for her would have been, she starts out really wanting to leave a legacy as an artist, and something happens and she kind of like finds herself, and then she ends up realizing that like the art she made along the way is just as important, or something along those lines. And that it's okay to not like have this like famous legacy. You don't have to live up to these plans that you have for yourself or that your family does. And then, spoiler alert, the truth of what happens is that it turns out her family has a lot of sway in the way the world works in a bad way, and has made decisions for other people that they have no right to make. And she serves as the like voice of reason, being like, you can't keep playing with people's lives this way. And her impact is really in realizing that like, not only is it not important to leave to like be this big famous person, but hey, you need to take a step back. Like, your family needs to stop meddling in the world in these ways. And so I would never have, I never would have gotten there if it weren't for like the way that things worked out with our story. So I'm really happy with where it ended, and I was genuinely surprised. Even though I knew that she would die, I had no idea that it would involve reworking realms.
A lot of Ari, I think, is a story told in reverse in a way. First episode Ari, he is cold and calculated, and he, I think, would be happy to die to save the world. That is like, he wants to be, you know, that hero. And throughout the story and throughout the magic, both keeping him young looking and keeping him on a leash of this agency, once he was able to get his wrinkles and his gray hair and he started having friends, he did not want to die because he had a family to save the world. And it was a very painful situation to take yourself away from that. I got a unique opportunity. When I first started playing Ari, in my head, he was ace. He was asexual. I didn't want to have any sort of romance in the game, and I never stated that or anything. It was just something in my head as I played the character, and as we met, who would later become his husband, Seb Tate, who was like a villain at first until we started working together, and I took the move, gain an ally, and put him on there, so it really pushed that along. And I, very happy as a queer person, being able to tell a story about two older men, gray hair, you know, falling in love, and
I love it.
especially in Florida where it took place. Luckily for them, both of them became what we called the Chronicled, which is somebody that if there's enough stories written or told about them, they live on in a sense. So Seb and Ari got to live on in a farmhouse in a pocket dimension, basically, for all eternity.
Adorable.
So I'm glad I got to tell a story almost in reverse of somebody who wanted to be the hero becoming somebody who just wanted to have a real life.
We've kind of been touching on it here, but can you think of any little moments, like just like one-off things, like, oh, what about this, that turned into something bigger? Like I personally can remember, I think this was before we started recording, Lauren, where you, me, and Jonny, I think were just chatting it up, and Jonny asked me, I think, like, what was Casey's first date or something? Or I was just like, I think Casey actually dated a girl, like, in college. And Johnny's just like, oh, like ears perked up, like, tell me more about that. And suddenly it spiraled into this, like, yeah, Casey actually had this other girlfriend who died, is now a ghost, and suddenly became, like, a minor, like, story in our podcast. Was there anything like that for you guys with your characters?
For me, it is the fact that Kira has dissociative identity disorder, which then led to my second character, Anna, who is a separate personality that I started playing. That's the big one. It all came down to that dice roll. Yeah, I failed my manipulate someone roll for my childhood, apparently.
There's a specific moment in our show fairly early on, we call it the cloud fight, where Ari, basically through seeing a text message, the rest of the squad learns that he has been lying to them and betrayed them in a way, not like dangerously, but it was emotional for the characters. We like got in an argument and a fight about it, which ended up in two characters just walking away and leaving the space. That was emotional on a game level and a personal level, because I thought I was doing something wrong, but it was all for the story, and it was a turning point in the relationships of all the characters, and I think us as players, where in Monster of the Week you are encouraged to split up, you know, you're encouraged to have these interpersonal conflicts, and that is something that I am not used to from a D&D player's perspective. So that was very early on, where I thought I was playing the character wrong, and it ended up really shaping all of the characters in just that one party argument, and that one just really stands out to me. There's a lot of, you know, cool moments and stuff, action in the show, but it's the emotional ones that stick with me the most.
Yeah,
for sure.
Everything to do with Dorian actually was entirely just us goofing. All of our opinions of Dorian were like decided for folks who don't know. On the podcast, Dorian was introduced as this side character, an NPC originally, that for whatever reason, that day when we were recording, we just had a gut reaction. And I say we because it wasn't just me. It was also Hannah. The two of us had like a gut reaction to Dorian as a character. And that was entirely just a goof. It wasn't even intended to be like a beyond just that one episode, but for whatever reason it kind of stuck and became an inside joke about how we feel about Dorian. And then that led to an entire shift in who Dorian was as a character. And I think Quinn, our GM, can speak a lot more about that because he's the one that kind of made those decisions. And kind of, I think he already had plans for Dorian, but like it was swayed by how we responded in the moment. And I can't even entirely explain why we felt so strongly about Dorian as an NPC, but sometimes you just have strong opinions.
Sometimes you just get that person.
Yep.
Again, thank you so much. I think I've listened to episode 30 of Monster Hour Season 1, The Hollow Circus, probably 6 times because I did just to like learn the character. But holy shit, what a good twist.
What a huge twist.
Incredible.
And so validating.
That's what I was like, yep, Monster Hour, 100%.
Oh, that's so great. I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah. It was, it absolutely created a plot twist of sorts. I know that like Quinn already had like plans, but again, I think that our characters just not trusting, just like being like, I don't know about that. Really kind of like offhandedly led down this path. And I really liked that. I thought that was a great way to kind of use our intuition in the moment to like sway things. And I think it was an emotional thing because if you know the path of Dorian as a character, things end up happening with Dorian and other members of the podcast that I didn't see coming, and I very much appreciated. And I really loved seeing that. I'll take one more example really quickly that is more specific just to my character. Constance is a relationship with oh wow, how is my brain not remembering his name?
Is it Mr. Blue?
Yes, thank you. Oh my gosh, I wanted to say the blue guy and I was like, that's not right.
So close.
Look, yeah,
the Blue Man Group.
Look, it's been a while since season 1. All right, I'm fully steeped in the somewhere world right now. Okay, so yes, Mr. Blue was essentially, I think. I don't know Quinn's exact plans for Mr. Blue, but I think the friendship, the odd friendship and like then uncle vibes that Mr. Blue and Constance ended up with was so unexpected and very much like felt out in the moment that for me, that was like a small choice that like turned into, an entirely new relationship. And for Constance, like new family. Which is just not what you expect when you're like trying to make deals with some like creepy, entity, right? You're not like, this creepy entity is going to become a member of my family that I make like Christmas sweaters for, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I can relate to that with Theo. But I'm very curious about character bleed, how much you incorporate yourself into a character. I know we've been kind of joking and talking about how we sometimes use our sessions as therapy. I definitely 100% do. I talk to my therapist about my characters and I'm like, they did this and I can really relate to this. And then we break it down.
I love that.
In therapy. So what is like the character kind of bleed for you guys? How much of yourself kind of are in the character? But then also, how do you keep your character from yourself? I know there's the thing as like walking away and being too much in your character, if that makes sense. Kind of a rambling question there, but.
Yeah, I do think it's really important to have that separation. I will say that this is something that I struggle with. For better and for worse, I'm a very like emotionally available person when it comes to portraying characters. And so I feel very deeply when I'm playing a character and I just can really get into their shoes very easily. So that is a challenge for me, and something that I'm trying to like work on, and trying to separate between my character and myself. And I think no matter what character you play, there is going to be some aspect of yourself in them. It's impossible not to. So I think it just depends on, the level of, how much, where is that separation between you and the character? I think it gets easier to separate yourself from a character when there's a little bit more distance between how similar you are. I think it gets a little trickier when there's a lot of yourself in a character, and I think that's the case for me with Kira in some respects. There's a lot of that I identify with her just in her personality, and how she feels the need to be perfect and that kind of stuff. Like that's something that I really take on, and so I've gotten better at it. In the last couple of years, especially in doing it in a podcast format. I think it becomes a little bit easier because it's like, okay, nope, this is literally, we're doing this as a show. And I think it's just important to take that time for yourself after the game to just set it aside. Sometimes it helps to talk about it with, whether it's with your fellow castmates or even with like your partner or whoever, another friend. Sometimes like I'll just like talk to my boyfriend and be like, oh, this thing happened in the game, and it'll just like go off, and then be like, okay, thank you. I just needed to like vent about it. So sometimes it's just about having that outlet after the fact, I think, to kind of let the steam out so it doesn't sit with you. So I think that's my only really advice for it. But it's something that I'm actively trying to get better at.
Yeah.
I think that without character bleed, characters would fall flat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's in acting, on podcast, or in anything. If you don't put a little bit of yourself in, which is, sacrificial in a way. If you don't put a little bit of yourself in, it is going to fall flat. I've got another Cap tip for you. I'm full of them today. I do a thing when I am learning a new character that I will find a scented candle that matches that character's vibe. And when I am recording that character, I light the candle. Olfactory senses brings you into that character. As soon as I'm done, you blow out the candle. It's over. You're not that character anymore. It's very helpful.
I love that.
Dang.
I could already tell Maya's going to start doing that.
Too.
She loves candles.
It helps tremendously. Fire safety, though, everybody.
I don't have a character boyfriend, son.
The funny thing is that scent thing, I have heard people do that to try to get themselves in the zone to do things. So like if you're trying to go on a walk every day, have a candle you light to like start your routine for getting ready to go on a walk, because scent is so connected to how you do things. I had never thought about doing that for characters. I love that. That
is a
amazing.
good idea.
If there's no character bleed, there's no real character there, because you are a human, or at least presumably you are a human, and therefore must.
I'm a cyborg.
Yeah, must provide some life experience into your creation, even if the life experience is that you are the exact opposite of the character you're playing. I think something I've started doing, this is not a TO tip, because that would imply that I think this is necessarily effective or good, and I don't know if either of those are true, but I like to hone in on one emotion that I connect to that character. Like there might be multiple emotions and things I connect, but one that like I really strongly connect with that character, and tap into my emotional version of that when that emotion is coming up for the character. So kind of what I mean by that is like for Constance, it was like her sense of justice was very much drawn from my sense of justice. So it was really easy in those moments to literally just, that was very much like, what would Tio do? Emotion. And so there was no separation on that particular thing. A bunch of other things, yes, but on that one, it was like a direct pipeline. And so a lot of the conversation when Constance blips her mom and her grandma at a time, and it like sits on the ground and is like, we're not leaving until we sort this out. That was like the Tio sense of justice pulling in. But then a lot of other things weren't. For Claire, hilariously, maybe this is a bad thing to admit, but For Claire, the emotion I draw, like directly bleeding from me, is her rage. So when she is angry, that is like my anger. Like when she is like threatening counsel, like that is the way that my gut instinct of rage. Now I don't always act on that.
I am not an angry person in life. I'm a very calm person, and I would not see rage as being the indicator for Claire, but I was going to say the same thing for Ari, that rage is the emotion that I pull from myself and put into him, because I don't release rage and anger in real life. I'm just not that kind of person, but I was given that vessel to do that, and it was very helpful.
Yeah.
In such an amazing way.
That would be an interesting way to like analyze all of our characters, because like I think Casey's probably the rage, but then Theo I think is just some sort of sadness. Or shyness.
There's a very thin line between the rage and the sadness.
That's true. Yeah.
And Anna's just basically me when I'm drunk, so.
Incredible.
No inhibitions. That's that character.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, now these are really, I kind of want to do like a re-listen of now, like with that in mind. I love that for all these characters.
Yeah. I was going to mention a cap tip as Miah, that to kind of get your head out of your character or just like release it is sometimes after an intense session, I write down how my character's feeling in my notes, maybe like what they want to do next time, because that helps me like leave it there. But then it also helps me like get back into character, like, okay, what happened last time? How is my character feeling?
I will say specifically one last thing on character bleed. In the way of podcasting that we do, having those real emotions will make your listeners latch onto your characters like nothing else. I mean, it's very silly for me not to think of this, but a lot of people like the sad boy trope. And it really, Ari has a lot of people latch onto Ari, and I can't thank them enough. There's people with tattoos for Ari. Like, it's bonkers to me that this character that I made would resonate in such a way with listeners of the show. And I think that's, take care of yourself when you're playing your characters. Let yourself bleed in, but don't overdo it, and talk to the people you're playing with or whoever you can talk to about it.
Yeah, I agree.
But it's a good thing.
Yep.
I think that's a perfect way to move into wrapping up. But I want to say both Ari and Constance, even I resonate with. It makes complete sense why our listeners would resonate with them. And of course, Lauren, Kira, I just like aspire to be like, 'cause she's so brave and smart, and sometimes I am not. But this has been such a joy to talk about character stuff. I hope that we can do more, because I feel like there's so much more that we can talk about and just geek out over. Thank you again, Lauren and Tio and Cap. Make sure all of our listeners, all you guys, go check them out, listen, catch up, re-listen. If you're wondering where you can find our guests' information and their shows, we will link those in this episode's show notes. Until the next book club or Monsters Playbook episode or Shrimp and Kits episode or Monster Hour episode, we will talk to everyone later.
Whoop whoop.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you for
Miah.
having me. This was so fun.
Yeah. This has been Book Club. My name is. Presented by the Monsters Playbook. Big thank you to Cap from Shrimp and Crits, Tio from Monster Hour, and our beloved monster mom, Lauren. You can find all our guests' shows and information in this episode's show notes. The Monsters Playbook is produced and engineered by myself, Miah Detjen-Wander. It is edited by myself and Lauren Johnson. Our theme song is by Jonny Grubb. If you like this episode, please tell a friend. We love friends. You can find the Monsters Playbook on the social media channel of your choice. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Tumblr, Blue Sky, and all of the other social media platforms that are out there. You can hang out with us on Discord. And if you like what we're doing, please consider supporting us on Patreon. We'll see you next week with a brand new episode of The Cover Story, where, as always, we'll have some good news and some bad news. Thanks for listening.